Thank you, Terry. Good morning again, everyone. Is there anyone here who's here for the first time? Welcome. Very glad to have you. Can you all hear me? Okay, good. Well, I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Nayaswami Bhavani. The rest of you do know me. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, God in the form of Krishna, says to Arjuna, his disciple, he says, out of 1,000, one may seek me. And out of 1,000 who seek me, one may find me. So I'm pretty excited about our talk today. The subject is the importance of soul receptivity. And I'm excited about it because as devotees and disciples of a God-realized master, many of us here today have made that very dedication. We've dedicated our lives to this very purpose of knowing God. So this is no small subject to us, is it? It's almost 50 years now since Swami Kriyananda started the Ananda community. He started it in 1968. And it's interesting to talk to some of Ananda's earliest members and to try to kind of get an idea of what life was like for them then. And it seems that even though most of the people lived in teepees and trailers and had no running water and no indoor plumbing, they all thought they had moved to heaven. They just loved it. Why? Because it was a sattvic environment. It was a God-reminding environment. They played together, they worked together, they spent time with Swamiji, and Swami just taught Paramahansa Yogananda's teachings with such enthusiasm that everybody was just so glad to be there. And in hearing one person who had been there pretty much from the beginning, he said to me, you know, in those days, we just went about with this aura of expectancy. We were just sure that any day one of us was going to go into samadhi. And then, of course, he said through the years, reality set in, and we realized it wasn't going to be quite that easy. It wasn't going to happen quite so soon. And so we settled into a longer rhythm. Well, it seems to me that the preparation of our souls for such a lofty goal probably began even before this incarnation. Master said to us, even to want to know God in this lifetime means that we have very, very good karma. And that means that we've already done some of the work. I like the way you, Jayanti, always point out how the affirmation has something to do with the talk and work. It's the work. It's what we have to do. So we have good karma to even want to know God, and that is good news. But what can we do for ourselves from this point? Well, the first thing we have to do is to seek to make God's acquaintance. Not in an abstract way, but in a personal way. By opening ourselves more completely to a relationship with God, God will come in closer. Some of you may remember that I attended the Parliament of World Religions a few months ago, and some of you have been kind enough to ask me what that was like, and it was wonderful. There were 10,000 like-minded people, 10,000 in this great big cavernous convention center. It was amazing. And at the very beginning, the opening ceremonies, we were in Utah, Salt Lake City, Utah, by the way. And at the opening ceremony, there were people sitting on the stage. But before they got up to speak, about 6 or 7 Native American people came out in their beautiful regalia. And they walked up to the podium, and one of them stepped forward to speak. And he said, "We are the Ute people, and this is our land, and this is sacred land, and we want to welcome you here." It was so powerful, and it just so touched me. There were so many choices for workshops and larger plenary sessions for all the different traditions being represented, but I chose, since there were so many choices, I chose to focus on the indigenous people. And there were many representing many indigenous people from many different parts of the world. So what I wanted to mention today, along with our subject, was that I was so impressed with how the indigenous people have such a personal relationship with God. They know as well as anybody that there's this larger reality, and that we're all a part of that as well. But they've chosen, in their style, their way of relating to God, to relate to God within creation, in the physical. And so they speak to God as Son, Father, Earth, Mother, grandfathers and grandmothers of the rocks and the trees and the rivers. It's very, very personal. And I think about that, and I think, well, God is very familiar to them. They've made God's acquaintance. There were morning worship services in the Parliament each day, and I went to the Sacred Fire location where the indigenous peoples worshipped. And over the days, I heard a Laplander from Scandinavia, a person from Africa, a Mayan from Mexico, and some Maori from New Zealand. And their way of speaking, their way of relating to God was all the same, across the board. That's how people of the earth, the indigenous people, relate to God. And it was just so beautiful. And I just thought to myself again, they were so comfortable. They were so natural, so familiar with God, that there was no doubt in their mind. They knew they were talking to a conscious entity, being, however you want to say it, but they were comfortable doing that. They had made God's acquaintance. And I was thinking also another example that just kind of tickles me, and that is, you probably all know the play and the film Fiddler on the Roof. Many of you probably know that one. And the character of Tevye, the milkman. And this takes place in maybe the late 1800s, and he lives in a small village, Jewish village, in Russia. And he not only knew God, he argued with God. He was really very comfortable in God's presence. And at the end of the day, it would show that he would sit on his milk cart. It was all empty now. He'd made all his deliveries. And he'd sit there and just have a chat with God each night. And I loved what he would say. He'd say, why do things have to be so difficult for us? Because the government forces were always coming in and harassing them. And he'd say to God, Master of the universe, why? Why does this have to be so difficult? Can't you go a little easier on us? And again, I love that naturalness, that familiarity. Tevye had made God's acquaintance. So, Paramahansa Yogananda encouraged us to know God. And he used to say, this is a quote that is so precious to me. It's one of my favorites of all of Yogananda's quotes. This is another one that I want to say right now. He encouraged us by saying, keep calling him. Keep calling him. Whether he replies or not, keep calling him. And that's actually a beautiful song that one of the Ananda members put to music. Some of you may know it. Keep calling him. Keep calling him. Whether he replies or not, keep calling him. Well, whenever I think of those words, I want to try a little bit harder. The self-realized masters of all traditions do not come to us to impress us with how important they are. Instead, they come to tell us something much, much more important than that. They come to tell us that we can know God the way they know God. And so the next step in soul preparation is to find a spiritual path that works for us, one that fits us just like a glove. And that means committing ourselves, and then we have to not only find the path, we have to practice it, not in a passive way, but in a very dynamic way. And that means studying the teachings, it means practicing the techniques, it means absorbing, and as the reading said today, attuning ourselves to God's presence as it is presented to us in that path. I remember when I began to study Yogananda's Second Coming writings, which are commentaries on the Holy Bible. This was after years of trying to study the Bible on my own. And I came across the passage where Jesus is saying to his disciples, all that I am, you can be too. It had never occurred to me that I could know God one day as Jesus knew God. But Master was saying that's exactly what Jesus meant when he said those words. Yogananda didn't just inform us of the possibility of knowing God, he also told us how to go about it. He said, and this is the quote that I really hold to my bosom here. I come to tell you all of him and the way to encase him in your bosom, and of the discipline that brings his grace to those of you who have asked me to guide you to my beloved's presence. And that's one that I've always kept printed and out where I can see it every single day. The path that we follow as disciples of Paramhansa Yogananda is known as Raja Yoga. And Raja Yoga is also known as Patanjali's Eightfold Path. And I think of Patanjali, who actually lived 2,000 years ago, but he's actually considered the father of modern day yoga. Why? Because he stated even back then the teachings in a way that was simplified, ways that we could relate to and understand. And so the Eightfold Path is a classic path to realization. And I like to think of it as a roadmap that brings us from outer awareness to inner consciousness. It's a very clear and deliberate path, and it shows us exactly how to prepare ourselves for the fullness of God's presence. Some of you are taking the current Raja Yoga class here that Nirmala and Dharmadas are leading, and so this is something you already know. The first two stages of the Eightfold Path, the yamas and niyamas, help us to get our outer life under control so that it doesn't become a distraction. And then the next two stages of the Eightfold Path, asana and pranayama, they help us to get our body and our mind under our control, again, so that ill health and lack of peace of mind don't create distractions for us. But then the last four stages of the Eightfold Path begin the process of interiorization. And it is at this point that we gather our energy within instead of sending it out all the time. We gather it in and we learn how to control that energy, how to direct that energy at will. And at first there are many breaks in our concentration, and then fewer and fewer, until we're able to focus single-pointedly, leading us to a final merging into God. Master assured us that with perseverance, our practice ensured success. And here again is another one of my favorite quotes. He said, God is the nearest of the near, the dearest of the dear. He is just behind our thoughts, just behind our restlessness. The roadmap to inner consciousness is not only known by the term of Raja Yoga. For years I have been an admirer of a Christian mystic known as Saint Teresa of Avila from Spain. Some of you may be familiar with her. And the church fathers of her time held her in high regard. It was acknowledged that she had many ecstatic experiences. And so they asked her if she would record her experiences for the benefit of the nuns who were in her charge. She was a mother superior of a convent. And the result was a spiritual classic known as The Interior Castle. Very, very special book. And in it she refers to what she called the different stages of prayer that she had experienced. And she compared them to the 4 stages of planting a garden. In the first stage, she said, you determine that you want to have a garden. And so you cultivate the soil, you plant the seeds, and you water the seeds. And in the second stage, you have to force yourself to remind yourself to go to the garden every day and to water that garden, take care of it. In the third stage, just becomes kind of part of your routine. And you go to the garden every day, along with everything else that you do, and plants get watered. And in the fourth stage, you're so attuned to your garden that you feel like you're there all the time. And I read that, and I thought, why? St. Teresa is talking about the Eightfold Path. She's talking about those last 4 parts of the Eightfold Path. And so she probably never came across the word yoga in her life, but she was describing the same universal experience of the soul's journey toward God. So how do we prepare the soul for God realization? 1, we have to want to know God. 2, we have to dedicate ourselves to our chosen path. We must be persistent and keep our eyes on the goal for as long as it takes. Finally, we have to relax, confident that God knows what's in our heart and that He will reveal Himself as He will. I'd like to close with the words to one of Swami Kriyananda's songs. God is all I know. He is all there is. Wise is he who says